Hey Krishna. Good evening. Always a pleasure to see you all again. We are in the 8th mantra of Sri Isopanishad. And we're really getting into some interesting territory here. This particular mantra does not adhere to the iambic lengths that we're accustomed to. So in particular, the fourth line is about twice as long as any other fourth line in the Isopanishad. So we'll try this together, but I'm not sure how it's going to fit with a melody. Sa paryagach chukram akayam avranam. You're welcome to recite that with me. Sa paryagach chukram akayam avranam. Asnaviram shudam apapa vidam. Ashnaviram shudham apapa vidam. Kavir manishi paribu svayambur. Kavir panishi paribu svayambur. And this is the hard one. Yata tatyator tan vyadadach chasvatibhyak samabhyaha. Yata tatyator tan vyadadach chasvatibhyak samabhyaha. Well, I'm not even sure if the melody will fit. We'll give it a try. Sa paryagach chukram makayam avranam. Sa paryagach chukram makayam avranam. Asnaviram shudam apapa vidam. Ashnaviram shudam apapa vidam. Kavir manishi paribu svayambur. Kavir manishi paribu svayambur. Yatha tyata tortan vyadatat chasvatibhyak samabhyaha. Yatha tatya tortan vyadadat chasvatibhyak samabhyaha. Translate the synonyms of this 8th mantra are as follows. Sa, that person. Paryagat, must know, in fact. Shukram, the omnipotent. Akayam, unembodied. Avranam, without reproach. Asnaviram, without veins. Shudham, antiseptic. Apapavidam, prophylactic. Kavi, omniscient. Manisi, philosopher. Paribu, the greatest of all. Svayambhu, self-sufficient. Yatha tyatata, just in pursuance of. Arthan, desirables. Vyadadat, awards. Shasvatibhya, immemorial. And samabhyaha, time. Translation of the 8th mantra of Sri Isopanishad. Such a person must factually know the greatest of all, the personality of Godhead, who is unembodied, omniscient, beyond reproach, without veins, pure and uncontaminated, the self-sufficient philosopher who has both been fulfilling everyone's desire since time immemorial. I'm going to read this translation again and ask you to bear in mind that the speaker of the Isopanishad is drawing our attention, his audience or readership, to the personhood of the Supreme Being. And look again, as he's done in previous verses, he or she, because we haven't determined if it's a man or a woman, but the speaker has used other devices, very close yet very near, runs but does not run, to point out the inconceivable energies of the Supreme. Here again, we have such a device, such a person, meaning the sincere seeker who is seeing the divine in all beings, must factually know the greatest of all, the personality of Godhead, who is unembodied, Now here is the speaker referring to the Supreme Person and saying, and yet unembodied, omniscient, all-knowing, beyond reproach, without veins. Now, interesting, unembodied and yet also without veins. We'll discuss what that might mean in a moment. Pure and uncontaminated, the self-sufficient philosopher who has been fulfilling everyone's desire since time immemorial. Well, if someone is without veins, it suggests that they do have a form, a body, but it is a body unlike our material body that is without veins. And so in this instance, we can get a sense of what the sastras, the texts, mean when they say that the Supreme is without form or unembodied. It means that the Supreme has no material form, no material embodiment. It is a pure spiritual structure or frame within which we find pure, unadulterated divinity. I wanted to draw a historic point of contact with this verse because it was specifically this idea of the Supreme as a person, a being of inconceivable energies that was, we might say, a deal breaker for the British when they entered India in the 1700s. Here's a quote from John Kennedy, one of the preeminent missionaries from London, who delivered a typical vindictive about the deities or the embodied forms of the divinity that the British found in the temples of India. He wrote, "Whatever plausible argument may be advanced for image worship, we believe, we meaning we enlightened Europeans, that such worship materializes and debases the human mind, gives most unworthy views of God, and leads to a fetishism which in principle is identical with that of the most barbarous tribes. Till India rises above this idolatry, she will never have her proper place in the world." Well, this is, of course, a rather extreme condemnation, but not so atypical of people who don't understand the nature of personhood or the nature of the archa vigraha murti, or worshipable form of the personality of Godhead that we find given such care and attention and elaborate worship in temples. A murti, or a divine form, is different from an idol. To quote Diana Eck, professor of Hinduism at Harvard University, the murti of Krishna is more than a likeness. It is the deity himself taken form. And Prabhupada, in order to impress upon us, his students, the significance of deity worship, would give some very simple examples. He would say, just as the sun can act through sunshine and distribute heat and light across the universe, so Krishna, by his inconceivable power, can appear in his original spiritual form in any material element. I remember as a young man first joining the London Krishna temple in December of 1969. And the first thing that I saw when I came into the temple room was the deities of Radha, London Ishwara. Prabhupada had named the deity of Krishna in London, London Ishwara, the master of the city of London. And I had never, I don't think I had any opinion one way or the other, but I was impressed with some of the simple explanations that were offered when I asked, why are we offering fruits and flowers and trays of food to these marble statues on the altar? And I was told, well, you might say it's a marble statue, but it's an authorized marble statue. And the example that Guru Das gave me, Guru Das was a wonderful devotee in London back in those days who had been on the front lines with Dr. King during the freedom marches in the South in the mid-60s. Very bright, warm-hearted fellow. He said, if I make a mailbox myself out of wood and nails and a post, and I stick in front of my house, and I put a letter there, it's not going to get anywhere because that mailbox is not authorized. It doesn't have the potency of the postal department. He says it's like that. You can make a form according to your own ideas, but that form will not have the potency of a deity that is fashioned and installed according to the directions of the revealed texts. He gave me another example. He said, if I come into your home and I see that on the mantle you have a photograph of your family, and if I go up to that photo and I take it out of the frame and I tear it in pieces and throw it away and say to you, you have no reason to have this picture here on the on your shelf. It's just a piece of paper. You'd feel offended. You'd say to me, that's not just a piece of paper to me. To me, this is a very vivid encounter with my memory of my own family, and I'm insulted by what you've done. So in a similar way, the form of Krishna is worshipped in the temples, not because of some ignorance of a higher impersonal principle, but because the deity is Krishna himself appearing in a form that we neophyte, beginning practitioners, can see with these current material eyes. We do not yet have spiritual vision. But out of his kindness, Krishna appears in the form of the Archamurti, the deity form, to receive our service. There's this verse you see on the screen now from the 11th canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam. The deity form of the Lord is said to appear in 8 varieties: stone, wood, metal, earth, paint, sand, the mind, or jewels. That's an interesting selection of elements that are the traditional materials used to form the Archamurti in the temples. Here you see a photograph of Deity, a dear friend who lives in California, one of the devotee artists trained along with her husband Ramdas to create paintings of Krishna that were used on altars are used on altars in the ISKCON temples around the world. Paint being one of the elements in which Krishna will appear, provided, and here's the proviso, that the form, whether it be in paint or in marble or in wood, is fashioned according to the Shilpa Shastra, the text, the authorized text that describe the guide rules for creating a worshipable Archamurti. Shilpa Shastra gives exact prescriptions for the hand gestures, the way the deity is formed. Krishna is called Tribhanga, meaning that he bends in 3 places. You know the picture of Krishna playing the flute. So he's bent in the elbow. He has his waist turned in one way. He's got one leg bent over the other. So in his knee, there's a 3rd bend. Tribhanga, curved in 3 places. The hand gestures, the physical proportions, everything has to be done according to exacting detail so that the image is not imaginary, but fashioned according to the prescription for deity worship offered in the revealed text. The Shilpin, or yogi sculptor, yogi artists, bhakti fashioner of the deity, enters into a deep meditative state and works according to these scriptural directions. This is, by the way, is Yamuna, who wrote the most wonderful cookbook called Lord Krishna's Cuisine. Here you see her performing the installation of a small pair of Radha Krishna deities. I'm not sure what temple these are in, but the installation of the deities is also done according to very, very, very exacting rules of Archana Paddhati, or the formalities of deity worship. When executed according to these strict standards, and here you see Prabhupada at the installation of the deities at Bhaktivedanta Manor outside London. This would have been 1974, I believe. When the deity worship is executed according to these strict standards, being in the presence of the deity of Krishna is actually being in the presence of Krishna himself. They're non-different. The deity does not stand between you and God. Rather, the deity is God in a form that we can perceive. And he's there to facilitate the kind of outpouring of love that we read about here in this Sri Isopanishad. This is the verbal expression of someone who has been cultivating this vision of divinity in the world around him all his life. And Krishna's willingness to appear before us in the form of the deity is, one might say, an ultimate expression of God's love for humanity. That he agrees to humbly appear in a form that our material eyes can see. This idea is expressed quite eloquently by Pillai Lokacharya, who is a teacher in the Ramanuja tradition in the 13th century. And Pillai said, "This is the greatest grace of the Lord, that being free, he becomes bound. Being independent, he becomes dependent on his devotee. In other forms, man belongs to God, but behold the supreme sacrifice of the Murti, for here the Almighty becomes the property of the devotee." So there you have a little bit of background into the worship of the deities, which I must say that may be the single greatest hurdle for a lot of people. I was born into a Jewish family, and the idea of worshiping a form, the original idol was the golden calf described in the Old Testament. When Moses took his time coming down from Mount Sinai with the tablets, the Jewish people who had left Egypt were growing impatient. So they melted down all of their gold and created a golden calf. And this was the greatest offense. That instead of waiting for God's grace, you turn to something that you fashion of your own imagination. Ever since then, deities have been viewed as an offense to God, not as a vehicle to worship of God, but an offense to God. And that's taken some time. And I remember when I finally left living in temple life after 13 years and came back to New York, my mother said to me, "You know, I'm really glad you're home. And while you were living in the temples, the food was very nice. I really liked the food a lot. The music was sweet. I liked the music. That was very good. But what was with the dressing of the dolls? What was that all about?" She never could quite get her wrap her head around the idea that we were dressing dolls in the temple, is the way she put it. So I'd like to open this up for some discussion. If any of you have ever had some hesitation about the deities, or if there's been any confusion about what is this part. I remember in those early days, people coming to the London temple and hearing the great wisdom of the Bhagavad Gita, while meanwhile they're looking up on the altar and seeing the deities of Radha Krishna. And one guest came up to me after one class and said, "Listen, is it okay if, like I take the Gita, but I don't need to, I don't got to do deities, right? I don't want to do the deities. I'll just do the Gita." There's this kind of cherry picking of the parts that were comfortable and the parts that were uncomfortable. So please, I'm very curious to know, is everyone comfortable with deity worship? No. Lisa's shaking her head. Yeah, that's a tough one. That's a tough one. It takes a while to come to this appreciation that, as we learn from this mantra of Isopanishad, that if we accept that divinity is all powerful, then there is no obstacle to Krishna appearing in the form of the deity out of his kindness, so that we can see him, so that we can remember that he is a person, so we can offer food to him and sanctify the food with prayer. It's just not something that in our 21st century sensibilities is a part of everyday understanding of things.
May I ask a question?
Yeah, sure.
It's not so much for me the worship or non-worship of the deities or the forms, but all the rules that go along with it. Like you just went through this very beautiful explanation about creating the deities or paintings of the deities themselves, and it's very prescribed. There's a certain way to do it, and so if someone doesn't do it that way, does that say that what they've created is less? And then also, just in the worship of the deities, the thing that always turns me a little bit like, no thank you, is this prescription. Like, first you must do this, then you must do that, then you must do this, and then you have to do that. And if you don't do all those steps, then your worship is negated. But at the same time, Bhagavad Gita says, if you offer me anything that you offer with devotion, I will accept. So it's very confusing for me.
All right, wonderful questions. As to your first question, there's a course of training that any devotee artists must go through before he or she is allowed the honor, the opportunity to create a deity. So the answer to your first question is that there are very, very strict rules for how it should be done. It's not that anybody can just go ahead and make a deity, put it on a table, and worship it. That's not the way it works. Usually there are many years of training that go into understanding the nature of sacred form. This is what is called the Shilpa Shastra, or the scriptures governing the forming, the creating of worshipable forms, the archamurtis. And for example, I remember visiting the devotee workshop in the Los Angeles temple the first time I went there back in the early 70s, and was so impressed to see that the painters would not wash their paintbrushes in the bathroom sink, because these brushes are being used to manifest Radha and Krishna, divinity, on canvas. So they had a special sink that they would use just for cleaning the brushes that were used to create these sacred paintings. And there were prayers. Before you begin the work of painting or sculpting a murti, you shower, you put on clean cloth, you say prayers. There's a deep meditation around the act of creating a deity. So it's not that you can just do whatever you want and call a deity and put it up there and expect that it's going to work. The second part of your question is, doesn't that go too far sometimes? If I'm kind of paraphrasing, Julie, what you said, that it seems there are all these restrictions. You first have to do this, and then you have to do that. And yet, isn't it all really about love? Isn't it all about offering something from our heart with devotion? Why all of these restrictions? Okay, good, insightful question. The first thing, as a matter of form, is to understand that deities come on different levels, you might say. The deities of Radha and Krishna are considered the very, very highest level of Archa Vigraha, Archa Seva, the worship of the deity. And generally, beginner devotees are not recommended to install deities of Radha and Krishna, because there the prescriptions and the guidelines are very, very intricate. That's the most intricate form of deity worship. You may be familiar with Jagannath. Jagannath is kind of smiley face, wooden deity. Jagannath, there's no rules or regulations for Jagannath. Jagannath is ultimate merciful deity form of divinity. And those were the first deities that Prabhupada installed in San Francisco, in Haight-Ashbury in 1968, because goodness knows nobody was ready back in hippie land days for those higher, more intricate forms of Archana Seva. And they would be bringing all kinds of things to offer to Jagannath. Some people brought their laundry, so please bless my laundry. And someone else was bringing a box of flowers and bless my flowers. And feathers, they bring feathers and put it on the. Jagannath is just whatever you wish to offer me. I'm very grateful. Thank you very much. So different levels of complexity, if you will. The deities of Chaitanya, with arms in the air, are also, that's a much more easily approachable form of deity worship, because Chaitanya also came 500 years ago to bring the least qualified into the community of devotion. So that's also a kind of less stringent way of offering deity worship. So that's from the technical side. That you can, depending on where you are in your devotional progress, there are different levels of Archana Seva. But you make a very good point. And this is actually something that overrides all other considerations. If the offering comes from the heart, if it is a true offering of love and devotion, then any shortcomings in the technicalities of the worship, any oversight of the proper chronology of events, you offer the flower before you offer the water or whatever, those are all set to the side. There is no, in love, there is no offense. And you rightly cited that verse from Bhagavad Gita, Patram Pushpam Phalam Toyam Yome Bhaktya Prayachate. If one offers me, Krishna says, with love, a leaf, a flower, I'm so grateful for that. So that's the real standard of devotion, is if it's a gesture of love from the heart. So well done. Thank you. Thank you for that. Yes, that's why Jagannath is your favorite. I share my favorite too.
We had some
We have some.
scrolled up there.
Let's see what we have here. If I can get to those other messages.
I'm not looking to it that way. Just take your participant window.
Go like that.
Mhm.
Is the golden calf at all related to the Nandi? Well, Nandi, which is the bull carrier of Lord Shiva, I don't think so. I don't, Mike, I'm not sure that there's a direct connection there, because Nandi's bull, Shiva's bull, Nandi, is a great devotee and very much appreciated by the bhakti community. And Nandi was not invented out of frustration that God's not coming to me fast enough. So there's a vast difference there. Sandra says, it is hard coming from a Jewish background. Is there a simple way to talk about it? Or does it just, like you said, take time to understand? Or is what you just described the simple understanding? Hope that makes sense. Yeah, I've had people walk out of presentations over this point. Emotions run very, very deep when it comes to the idea of embodiment of the divine in a material form. It just seems so contradictory, and that people take offense. It's generally not something that would be discussed. Let's say if this were a beginning class on Bhagavad Gita, I would not have brought it up. But because we're this far along in our study of Isopanishad, and the speaker of Isopanishad is going out of his way to make this point quite explicitly, that God possesses infinite energies. he also has the ability to control and direct those energies as he sees fit. So out of his kindness, if he wishes to appear in a form that we can appreciate, what's there to stop him? It's not that it's someone's effect. You know, no one wakes up and says, I'm going to become an idol worshiper today. I think I'll invent a form of God, put it on my desk, and start to worship it. It's usually a misunderstanding of this particular aspect of the omnipotence of divinity that puts people off, that has them going in a different direction. We can talk more about this if you're interested. We'll bring it up at the beginning of tomorrow's class. Let's see, one last question, perhaps. Let's see, what do we have here? Gaur Shakti, you have a question? You want to unmute your mic and ask your question?
Hare Krishna. I don't know if I'm doing this right or not. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I hear you fine.
Okay. This is my first time unmuting.
Welcome to the world of unmuted.
I had a comment. I remember you were talking about Prabhupada in the early days, and I remembered from Lilamrita the story about him teaching, might have been Arti, but how he had to do it in small steps, because he said, if I tell them all to you at once, you'll pass out.
Yes, that's right.
So I thought of that. My question was, and I might have missed it because my phone cut out and I took about a minute to come back in. Where in Shastra is like all the information about like the deity worship and deity construction and whatnot?
Okay, a short form answer because we've run out of time. You'll find in 11th canto Srimad Bhagavatam, I believe it's the 27th chapter that describes about deity worship. Shilpa Shastra is an entire text given over to the details of the Archa Seva, the worship of the Vigraha form. You'll also find some references, as Julie pointed out, in Bhagavad Gita. There's a verse, for example, in the 9th chapter where Krishna says, Avajananti mamudha manusim tanumasritam. People with an incomplete understanding of my nature think that I assume a form when I come into the world. They do not understand Parambhava Mahaja Vaho. They don't understand my para, my superior energy, that this form is not different from me. I haven't taken on this form like somebody puts on a jacket. My form and I are not different. So even in Bhagavad Gita, you'll find some references that point to an understanding of the deity Seva.
Thank you so much.
We're at the end of our discussion again this evening. Thank you. Challenging topic, good questions. Bravo to you all. Please join me in the Vaishnav Pranam. Vanchakalpa turubhyascha kripa sindhubhyaivacha patitanam pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. I wish you all a wonderful evening. Thank you for your company and your friendship, and I'll hope to see you all tomorrow. Be well. Bye.